Hunters are often seen as fearless, braving the wilderness, facing wild animals, and surviving in some of the most dangerous environments. But what happens when even the most seasoned woodsmen fall victim to something far more sinister? Tonight, we'll dive deep into The Vanishing Hunters, Unsolved Disappearances in America's Dense Forests, a chilling tale that explores the mysterious disappearances of hunters in one of the most remote regions of the United States, the Tongass National Forest. From eerie legends to terrifying encounters, this story will leave you questioning what truly lurks in the shadows. Before we begin, let me ask you this. Have you ever been deep in the woods and felt like you were being watched? Let us know in the comments below. Your story could be featured in a future video. And don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our spine-chilling tales. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this video. The Tongass National Forest stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of untamed wilderness in southeastern Alaska. Its towering evergreens, tangled underbrush, and deep, echoing silence held secrets older than the first settlers. To the locals, the forest was a source of both sustenance and superstition, a place to respect and sometimes to fear. Daniel Hayes knew its trails like the back of his hand. At 43, he was a seasoned hunter with years of experience navigating the dense woods. He had taken countless trips into the wilderness, always returning with game and stories to share. But on a cold October morning in 2018, Daniel embarked on what would be his final journey. Buddy, his loyal Labrador retriever, bounded ahead, tail wagging as they entered the forest. Daniel adjusted his pack, the faint crunch of frost beneath his boots the only sound. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced between the trees. He paused briefly, scanning the horizon, before moving deeper into the woods. Days later, Buddy emerged from the forest alone. The dog's normally golden coat was matted with mud, and his eyes darted nervously. Rescuers were baffled. Daniel's rifle was found propped against a tree, his pack untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, just a set of footprints that ended abruptly in a clearing. The search parties combed the area for weeks, but the forest kept its secrets. Daniel Hayes had vanished without a trace, becoming another name on a growing list of hunters swallowed by the Tongass. The disappearance of Daniel Hayes reignited a chilling conversation in the small communities surrounding the Tongass. He wasn't the first to vanish. Over the decades, whispers of hunters disappearing in the vast forest had become an unsettling refrain. To some, it was simply the harsh reality of the wilderness, a place where nature's rules reigned supreme. But for others, the disappearances hinted at something darker. Henry Marshall, a grizzled old man with a knack for storytelling, had lived near the forest his entire life. He often sat outside the town's only diner, spinning tales for anyone willing to listen. After Daniel's disappearance, his stories grew more somber. "You ever hear of the ones before him?" Henry asked, voice gravelly and low. A few patrons leaned closer, caught in the spell of his words. Tommy Rivers, 1973. The man was built like a bear, knew these woods better than anyone, went out for elk. 3 days later, his buddies found his camp. Fire still burning, gear all there. But no Tommy. Henry paused, his weathered face shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. Then there was Maggie Fields in '85. She wasn't a hunter, but she knew the woods. Just up and disappeared, same as Daniel. People said she'd been taken by the forest itself, swallowed whole. The stories were eerily similar. Seasoned woodsmen and outdoorsmen disappearing without explanation, their belongings left untouched. Search teams would find traces, boot prints, half-eaten meals, weapons abandoned mid-use. But the trails always led to dead ends. Locals attributed the vanishings to various causes: sudden storms, wildlife attacks, or even hidden sinkholes. Yet some believed in the old stories passed down through generations. These tales spoke of the Guard, an ancient force that protected the forest. According to the legends, those who disrespected its domain by overhunting or venturing too far were never seen again. The younger generation dismissed Henry's stories as folklore, a way for old-timers to keep their children from wandering too far into the woods. But as the years passed, the disappearances continued, and the forest's shadows grew longer. And now, with Daniel Hayes gone, the question hung heavier than ever. Was the forest merely dangerous, or was it something more? The story of Jim Harrelson was one that locals rarely spoke of, yet it lingered in hushed conversations whenever another hunter disappeared. Jim was the only person who had ever returned from one of the forest's vanishing acts, but he hadn't come back unscathed. It was 1982 when Jim, along with his two childhood friends, ventured into the Tongass for their annual hunting trip. The men were inseparable, bound by decades of shared adventures. They had camped deep within the forest, surrounded by towering pines and the distant calls of wildlife. But when Jim stumbled out of the woods 4 days later, bloodied and delirious, he was alone. "I don't know what happened to them," Jim had told the authorities during his disjointed interview. His voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes darting as if something unseen were still watching him. "We heard things, voices, but they weren't human. And then the light, bright and cold, like it was alive." The search for Jim's friends was fruitless. Their campsite was discovered intact, a fire pit still smoldering, gear neatly arranged. Tracks led away from the site but vanished abruptly, as if the men had been lifted from the ground. Jim's account grew stranger with each retelling. He described being chased by an entity with glowing eyes, its movements unnaturally fast and silent. He claimed it toyed with them, separating the group and leading them deeper into the forest. "It wasn't a bear," he would say, shaking his head. "It wasn't anything natural." While some dismissed Jim's story as the product of trauma or exposure, others believed him. Henry Marshall, for one, often defended Jim's account. "You don't come back from a place like that without scars," Henry would say. "And not all of them are on the outside." Jim never hunted again. He moved to a small town on the edge of the forest, but even there, he couldn't escape the whispers. Children dared each other to knock on his door, while adults avoided him altogether. Despite the years that had passed, the memory of what happened in 1982 never left him. And with each new disappearance, Jim felt the weight of the forest's gaze. as if it hadn't forgotten him either. Alice Harper had always been drawn to the unknown, a journalist with a penchant for the unexplained. She had spent years chasing stories of disappearances, hauntings, and phenomena that defied logic. When news of Daniel Hayes' disappearance reached her desk, it reignited a fascination she'd held since childhood, an obsession with the mysterious Tongass National Forest. The stories she uncovered painted a picture of fear and uncertainty. She read every article she could find, pored over police reports, and even interviewed locals, including Henry Marshall. His tales of the guard intrigued her, but it was Jim Harrelson's account that sealed her decision. Alice had to see the forest for herself. Equipped with camping gear, a notebook, and a small camera, she set out on a crisp morning in late autumn. The forest loomed ahead, a sea of green and shadow. As she entered, the air grew colder, the trees thicker, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. Alice followed the trail that had last been traced by Daniel Hayes, using maps and notes she'd collected. She marked her progress meticulously, ensuring she wouldn't get lost. Still, the deeper she ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. By the second night, the unease began to set in. As she lay in her tent, the silence of the forest pressed down on her. Then came the sounds, soft at first, like twigs snapping underfoot. She sat up, heart pounding, and strained to listen. The noises grew louder, circling her campsite. She fumbled for her flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing, but the sense of being watched was palpable, prickling at the back of her neck. In the morning, Alice found no tracks, no evidence of wildlife. But her camera, which she had left outside to record the night, was tilted on its tripod. Reviewing the footage revealed only static, save for a brief flicker of movement, a shadow darting just beyond the lens. Despite her fear, Alice pressed on. She knew she was close to something, though whether it was answers or danger, she couldn't yet tell. On the fourth day of her expedition, Alice Harper found herself in the heart of the Tongass. The forest had grown denser, the air damp and heavy with the scent of moss and decay. Her progress slowed as the underbrush thickened, and a peculiar quiet enveloped her surroundings. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this part of the woods. As she pressed on, she stumbled upon something unexpected, a clearing that seemed untouched by time. At its center stood a massive tree, its bark etched with strange symbols. The markings were intricate, almost ceremonial, spiraling upward in a language Alice couldn't decipher. She took out her camera, snapping pictures and scribbling notes, her curiosity overpowering her unease. The clearing held more than just the marked tree. On its far edge, concealed by foliage, was the entrance to a cave. Its mouth gaped like a wound in the earth, cold air seeping out as if the forest itself exhaled. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but Alice couldn't. She had come too far to walk away now. Inside the cave, the darkness was absolute. She switched on her flashlight, its beam revealing walls lined with more symbols, similar to those on the tree. The air grew colder as she ventured deeper, her breath visible in the narrow beam of light. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the cave, followed by a shuffle of movement. Alice froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The sound grew louder, closer. She backed away, her footsteps echoing in the confined space, until she caught sight of it. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that pierced the darkness. It moved with an eerie fluidity, its gaze locking onto hers. Alice turned and ran, her pulse thundering in her ears. The thing pursued her, its movements impossibly silent yet unrelenting. She burst from the cave and into the clearing, the daylight a momentary relief. But she didn't stop. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing among the trees, gasping for air. For the first time, Alice felt the weight of the forest's warning. This wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a place she was never meant to tread. Alice Harper emerged from the Tongass National Forest battered, shaken, and irrevocably changed. When she stumbled into the nearest ranger station days later, her clothes were torn, her face gaunt, and her eyes hollow. Her camera and notebook were gone, lost in her frantic escape, but her memory remained vivid, haunted by the glowing eyes and the oppressive silence of the cave. Her story was met with skepticism. The authorities conducted a search based on her account, but the cave she described was never found. The marked tree was gone, as if the forest had erased every trace of her discovery. Alice tried to share her experience with the world, writing articles and speaking on podcasts, but her accounts were riddled with inconsistencies, details that changed with each retelling, holes in her timeline that she couldn't explain. The public dismissed her as another victim of the forest's psychological toll, a journalist who had let her imagination run wild. Yet, Alice knew the truth. She carried it with her every time she closed her eyes, hearing the faint echoes of growls and the crunch of footsteps that never seemed far enough away. The Tongass remained, vast and unyielding, swallowing the unwary and guarding its secrets. For those who dared to venture too far, one thing was certain: the forest never forgot. So, what do you think happened to Daniel Hayes and the other missing hunters? Was it a force of nature, a predator, or something supernatural? The Tongass National Forest keeps its secrets well, but one thing is certain. It's a place where the line between reality and the unknown blurs. If the story gave you chills, make sure to hit the like button and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. And if you've ever experienced something unexplainable in the wilderness or anywhere else, drop your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Our next video dives into another set of real-life mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved.